Hi Blender fans, and welcome once again to Blender TC. In today's tutorial we're going to make this cube into a water wheel, and at the end we're going to use a hinge tool and some physics to actually turn our water wheel, and this is going to happen towards the end of the video. Subscribe, and don't forget, if you want to receive notifications, ring that bell. Hi Blender fans, and welcome again to Blender TC. So first of all, I'm going to cover some of the quick keys. I'm going to just move this up here, which is my shading viewport. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover G, which is the go key, which allows us to move our cube. Control Z will always undo our last move. G and X moves things along the red line. G and Y along the green line, and G and Z top to bottom. And of course Control Z will undo our last moves. I've got mine set to 40, which is usually enough to actually undo 40 moves in a row. The other thing we're going to cover is Tab key. Tab key takes you in and out of edit mode. What we've got here is, I like my icons to appear in a little cube there, so what I'm going to do is go into a line appears there, and holding the left mouse button, that just actually collapses this, which is very useful on your computer. Right, like I say, tab takes you in and out of edit mode. Let's begin our water wheel. So we've got our square, so I'm just going to scale our square. Right, the scale key is just the S key. So S, you can scale in the X direction like so. But we want to do this to a specific amount, so I'm just going to undo that. So I'm going to scale in the X by 3 to make our cube lengthen, and I'm going to scale in the Z by 0.2 just to make our plank of our water wheel. The N key will actually fetch up our dimensions, and as you can see, our scale is still wrong because I've got a 3, a 1 and a 0.2, which means of course that if we were to normalize these scales and make them a 1, 1 and a 1, as we get our cube back, but that's not what we want. So I'm just going to Control Z and undo. What we want to do is normalize these, and the way you do that is by Control and A, and then rotation and scale. As you can see, now that has turned to 1, 1, 1, so we have normalized our plank. I'm now going to move our plank up in the air, so G and Z by 4. As you can see, our plank now has moved up in the air, and if I press the 1 key to look from the front, you can see what it's done. The next thing we're going to do is actually we're going to move this origin point in the plank to the center of our screen, to the origin. The origin is this dotted red and white circle, so let's put it to the origin. So object, set origin to 3D cursor, and as you can see, that orange dot has now moved into the center of the screen. This will now allow us to actually spin this around our origin, which is there. So I'm just going to add an array with the plank selected, hit the wrench or spanner and add an array. So as you can see, I've added an array, and if we increase this just lengthens it, but this doesn't make our buckets on our water wheel. So let's just show you this little trick. So I'm just going to add in an empty. The empty I'm going to add in is the one that says arrows. The reason I do that is because it gives you Z, Y and X directions of this empty, and we'll be using that later on in the tutorial to make our water wheel turn. So with our empty selected, go to this little square, the orange square. We hit the orange square, and I'm just going to change it along the Y, and I'm just going to make it 45 degrees. If we're looking from the front and we type 45 into here, as you can see, the Z there is at 45 degrees. The reason we're doing this is because my water wheel is going to have 8 buckets, and this enables me to do it. I'll just explain this. going forward. So what we've got now is we've got our plank, which I'm just going to rename plank for now, just to make it easy for me to find it in the viewport here. Going there between lines will allow you to actually lengthen this if you wish. So I've now got my plank. I'm just going to actually go into my spanner there, and what we've got here is object constraints. As you can see, we've put the count to 1. I'm just going to 0 this because I don't want it to actually change in itself. I want it to actually go around this empty, so I'm going to select the object offset there, hit the little arrow at the side of it just to open it, and the object that I want to turn it around is the empty, so select the empty, and as you can see, nothing appears to happen because the count is 1. So I'm just going to change this to 2. As you can see, now we have got our partial bucket, but it's in the wrong place. So I'm just going to move my X factor to where I want it to be, and I'm going to move my Z factor up slightly just to take it up in the air until I've got the desired position. And that depends on how you want your buckets to look. So I think that's good enough for me. So we've got that first. In fact, I've got a little gap there, so I'm just going to get rid of that little gap. So 0.09, just to move it closer. A little bit of a gap, but I'm not so bothered now about that gap. So what we need to do now is we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So now we've got our water wheel buckets, and all I need to do is actually apply this modifier. Before I do that though, I'm just going to add a bit more geometry to my plank, because it will make it easier to texture later on if I wish to. So I'm just going to add a bit more geometry to it, just for my own benefit. By selecting Alt and pressing that, I've now selected that full ring. GG will allow you to actually move it to the end, and I'm just going to put a loop cut round all 4 corners. You could do this with a bevel if you wish, but I'm not going to do it with a bevel. I'm just going to do it by hand, just because I wish to. Right, so I've now got my water wheel. So I'm just going to apply this, apply, and looking from the front, as you can see, that's applied. I can now go into this, and I'm just going to 0 this again, just to put my empty, because we're going to use the empty again later on. With this water wheel part selected, it's still called plank, so I'm quite happy with that. What I'm going to do is set origin to geometry, which puts this dot now in the center of our buckets, and I'm going to 0 it up here in its location. 0, 0, and 0. What this has done is put everything to our 3D cursor again. There we go. I'm quite happy with that. Of course, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the actual walls of our water wheel. So we'll just add the walls, add mesh, and the circle. As you can see, that's now got that by default. If we open this up, it's got 32 edges. We don't want 32. I only want 8. So I'm just going to change that to 8, which of course makes this octagon. I'm going to rotate this along the X by pressing R, then X by 90. And of course, we've now got our octagon in the front. Go into the 1, or press the 1 key, S to scale. As you can see, I'm just scaling this up until it's over the point of our mesh. So I think that's about correct. I'm now going to go into edit mode by pressing the tab key. With 1 selected, I'm just going to hit this line select, you've got point select, which allows you to actually select points, lines, which will allow you to select a line, and of course face will allow you to select a face, but there's no face actually on this. So I'm going to go into line select with the Alt key pressed down, press the left click, and you've got everything selected. And then I'm going to press the extrude key by pressing E and scale this down by pressing the S key. As you can see, we've now got our wall sides of our wheel, but these lines don't seem to follow these buckets, so what I'm going to do is actually spin the middle line, so spinning it around the actual Y, so rotate by Y, and I'm just going to spin them until they go down there, just for my own benefit, because I think it looks better on our water wheel. It's up to you how you do it. Control Z. You could have it just like that if you wished. In fact, we'll just leave it like that for now. It might give a bit more interest to our water wheel. With that selected, what I'm going to do is actually select everything, go into face select, and I'm going to E extrude in the Y direction just to give it a bit of thickness like so. And press tab key, comes out of edit mode, and this will allow me to G and Y just to move it to the side. If I press the 7 key and look from the top and go into wireframe, as you can see, G and Y, what I'm doing there is I've put the actual sides of the bucket G and Y just like so, and it's up to you where you actually place this. I think that'll do for me, and I'm just going to duplicate this side now with pressing Shift and D and G and Y, and just pull it over. I've not grabbed that properly, so press Ctrl and Z just to undo. G and Y, it's not seeming to work. G and Y, that's better. Right, so I've moved it to about where I wish it to be, and as you can see, our water wheel's starting to actually, and what I've done is I've moved the original without duplicating it, so Shift and D just to duplicate it, G and Y. I'm having a few mouse problems here, so Control Z just to undo this. Let's try again, G and Y. X. I'm just going to delete this. This is not working at all, so Shift and D, pressing enter, G and Y. So sometimes Blender, for some reason, it just seems to go potty, and it just does, and just doesn't seem to work. I don't know if it's an issue with my mouse, but anyway, we got there in the end. So we've now got our water wheel shape with our buckets in. So what I'm going to do is actually join these together. So selecting that, I'm just going to add a little bit more geometry on these two by joining them. And what I'm going to do is add a bevel. So Control and B to add a bevel. Go into edit mode, select all, Control and B just to add a bevel, and I'm just going to add a little bevel to this because I wish to. There we go, which has added a bit more geometry to our model. I think you'll agree looks quite good. So we've now got our water wheel, but we haven't got any spokes. We do this simply by just adding a spoke and the mesh and a cube. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the center of the water wheel first. Scale in the Y, so that's my center of our water wheel, which I'm just going to have as a square. I'm then going to Shift and D just to duplicate that and rotate by the X by 90 just to make one of our fins or spokes. G and Y just to move it to the edge. Looking from the top, I'm just going to scale that down. Scale by 0.5 in the Y, 0.5, like so. I think that's a bit too thin, so I'm just going to scale this in the X by 2 just to make it into that kind of shape, and then I'll scale in the Z, scale Z by 10, and as you can see that's too big, so scale Z. I'm just going to shrink this down until it's the desired place. It's up to you how you want your water wheel to look, and then I'm going to move it G and Y just so it just touches the edges like so. And then because I'm going to repeat this plank again quite a few times, I'm just going to add a bevel to this as well. So pressing Tab, Alt, Control and B to add the bevel, press Enter to fix it. I'm just going to put this up to 1.01 and leave it at 2, like so. Tab to come out of edit mode, and then I'm going to duplicate this. So with that plank selected, Shift and D to duplicate and rotate in the Y direction by 90. As you can see, we've now got our 2 spokes. I'm just going to select this spoke and this spoke, and then right click to join. Then with these 2 selected, it's now 1, Shift and D to duplicate, and then rotate in by the Y, but 45 degrees this time. And as you can see, we've got a bit of overlap in here, which makes some funny things happen, like it goes in and out on our screen. We can cure this quite simply by moving it forwards or backwards. I'm just going to move it backwards slightly, so G and Y, and as you can see, our distortion has now disappeared, and I think you'll agree that our water wheel's starting to take shape and look quite good. So pressing the Tab key, select this cross here, select the other cross there, and then join them again by hitting the right mouse button and pressing join. So we've now got our cross on that side, but no cross on this side. So simply Shift and D to duplicate, looking from the top by pressing the 7 key, and G and Y just to move it across like so, so it's in the desired place where you want it to be, and I think that's about right for me. Alright, so all we've got to do now is join everything together, and we have made our water wheel. So lighting's a bit rubbish, but never mind. What we're going to do is select, come out of edit mode, select this, select that cross, and select our water wheel itself. Right click and join, and just make sure everything's connected, which it isn't. The central spindle isn't, so I'm just going to join that as well. In fact, did I put a bevel on there? I can't remember if I did, so I'm just going to bevel it slightly. So Control B, just oops, go into edit mode because you've got to select all faces. Pressing the A key will deselect and reselect all faces. Control and B, and I'm just setting the bevel a little bit wider, just to get my shape I wish, and I'm just going to increase this to 3 like so, because I just want it to look like that. And then I'm going to right click it and smooth shade it, and a bit of distortion there in that face. So with that cube selected, I'm just going to select this face and E and scale, just to put like a bit of a point on there, just because I wish to. Smooth shade. Yep, I'm quite happy with that. So with this selected and the central point selected, I'm just going to join these together. So now we've got our finished water wheel. The only thing we've got to do now is to turn it. So what I'm going to do is add an axle in here, and the axle is going to be made out of A. So add mesh, add a cylinder. As you can see, the cylinder there is quite big, so I'm just going to scale in the Z by 10 to make it a little bit bigger. In fact, and then I'm going to actually scale it down to a point and scale it Z by 2, scale by Z by 2 again. And what I've done is made an axle, and I'm going to rotate that in the X direction by 90. Just scale it down, scale Y until it's the desired scale I want. So that's my axle. Just to give it a bit of difference to this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my water wheel. Maybe add a bit more light because that's a bit hard to see things here, isn't it? So let me just add a light to this, just to Shift D to duplicate my light. I'm just going to put a light above it, just about there, just to cast some shadows, just to make things a bit easier to actually see our water wheel. And G and Z, just to move this up a bit, just so I can actually see my water wheel a bit more clearly. I might add a plane mesh and a plane scale, just to make things stick out more. G and Z. Each of these lights is casting a shadow, but you can actually go quickly into a light, go into light bulb, and you can make it not cast a shadow if you wish, if it's got too many shadows. So find your different lights and take the shadows out if you wish. So eventually you've just got your one casting light. In this case it's this one, and G. By changing the radius, it means that the shadow becomes softer, or taking it down to 0, it means it becomes really harsh, like you may be wanting this tutorial. Just move this over here, just to give some interesting shadows. So now I've got my water wheel there. I'm just going to add a bit of colour to it, so I'm going to make it new, make it brown or a different colour, just to actually make it stand out a bit. And I'm just going to make the floor a nice have a look, what colour do I like? I'll make it an off-white colour, and I'm going to leave the axle white, just to make it stand out. In fact, I'll make that brown as well. So selecting this, I'm going to select the brown colour. So the only thing we haven't done is we haven't actually glued the paddles to the actual water wheel itself, so we're just going to do that now. So select the paddles, select the rest of the water wheel, and then right click and join. So now that is all one object now, and I'm just going to rename it. It's been defaulted to the cube, so I'm just going to make it WHL because it's my wheel. Just a way of naming things. You can take the vowels out of things and it still reads correctly. Like that. You've got the axle there, AXL. Change the cylinder name to AXL. So we've now got a water wheel, which is WHL, and axle, which is AXL. So looking at our water wheel, what our other thing we've got is our empty down here. So if I select our empty and scale it up, our hinge tool actually works around the Z direction of an empty. So what we're going to do, if we were to actually work physics on this, then it would spin around on itself, which is the wrong direction. So what we'll do is with empty selected, rotate in the X by 90, and as you can see, the actual empty now has got the Z along the spindle. So with our empty selected, what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a hinge to this. So let's go into rigid body world, which of course is the physics properties here, which is the actual Earth with the moon going around it, and go into rigid body, and as you can see we've got no rigid body world, which is an error you'll get if you haven't got any physical properties of our Blender scene, which we haven't yet because we haven't set them. So selecting your wheel, we want to actually add a rigid body property to this, so I'm going to select rigid body. As you can see it says active, but it also says convex hull in the shape here. What we want this to be is the mesh, because we want the collisions to happen inside the area here, so we just want it to be on the mesh properties, not on the convex hull. If it's on the convex hull, when something hits there, it'll actually bounce off because it thinks this is a solid face. So we'll change that to mesh. So we'll now change that to mesh, and the same goes for the axle here, rigid body, but this time we're going to make this, instead of an active, we're going to make this a passive. So select passive, because we don't want this to move because it's the axle and everything's going to turn around the axle. So with our wheel selected, this means that we've now added rigid body physics to this. So if I press spacebar, as you can see, something really weird happens. It just looks like that's stuck in the spokes and it's just not working whatsoever. Spacebar to stop our animation, and if we press shift and our arrow key, it'll take us to the front. The other way to do this is go into animation like so. Let's just get to the same kind of look as that. We can actually select this, say our animation's going to about there. What you can do is just select one and it takes you back to the front of the animation. But for this tutorial I'm just going to keep in the modeling window because it makes it a bit clearer to show you. But that was under the animation tab. Right, so let's select our empty. Back out of edit mode. Select our, not the plane, select the empty, which is this thing with the Z on it. I said it was important, the Z, the Y and the X earlier on in the tutorial, and this is Y. Right, so select the rigid body. Right, the first thing that we want is the axle that the thing's going to turn around. Select axle, AXL, and then of course in the secondary we're going to select the wheel, WHL. If we now press spacebar, nothing happens. The reason being is that nothing is affecting our wheel. So let's make something to affect our wheel. So press the spacebar, shift and left click will take us to the front, and what I'm going to do is add in a mesh, and the mesh I'm going to add in is a UV sphere. Of course that's entered in the center, so I'm just going to G and X just to move it to one side and just smooth shade it just to make it look a bit smoother, and scale our ball, and I'm just going to G and Z just to move it up in the air. Looking at the 7 key, I'm just going to move it G and Y so it's above our wheel, G and X so it's above our wheel like so, and then I'm going to add rigid body physics to it. So select rigid body physics, press the space bar, and as you can see once it hits our wheel nothing happens because there is something wrong with our water wheel. The reason there's something wrong with our water wheel is that we haven't added the hinge to it yet. So select the empty. As you can see, the reason it's not working is that we've got on our type up here on rigid body constraints, which is under this moon and the earth, it says fixed. So what it's doing is just like dropping into the actual hole there on the water wheel, and that's because it's not a hinge yet. So what we do is open this little bar here and we put hinge, and then all the magic should happen. Let's have a look. Wait for it to actually start again, and there you have it. Yep, the ball fell out to the bottom and it's working our water wheel. G and Z just to move that floor down a bit, and I'm just going to add a collision modifier into that. So I'll make it a rigid body, make it a passive. So now when the ball hits it, it should just roll along it. Oops, is it? Has it gone straight through it? Let's see what the ball does when it hits it. I just stood still. That's just because it's not rolling, but let's just rotate the floor so it'll roll. I'm just going to rotate in the Y direction just to make it a bit of an angle, just to show you the physics working. Rotate. Right. There it goes. Surface response. I'll take the friction down so it'll actually roll off it. In fact, that's probably what's wrong with it in the first place. So I'll just change the rotation back to 0. Just make it flat again. As you can see, that's better. That's much better. As you can see, our ball is hitting our actual wheel and turning it around. That's just one way of actually turning our water wheel. To make our animation longer, what you can do is hit this here, which is a collection of shapes, and what we've got is a rigid body world. If we open this up, you'll see a thing called cache. You can change this to the actual end frame, so let's make the end frame 1000, and if we were to go into our animation and change this to 1000, change this to 1000, and as you can see, our water wheel falls off, and it'll keep going until it eventually stops, which is probably somewhere close on 1000. So this is really handy for making a water wheel. Like I say, you can do this with particle physics, but this can actually crash your machine depending on how fast it is, and you can do this with fluid motion. But that's something for another tutorial. I'm just getting the effect of this actual water wheel changing by being affected by the ball that hits it. You could add a little building into the side of it. I don't know, a bearing onto the ends of these shafts just to make it look a bit more real, and you could have a little water wheel here, and this would make a really entertaining animation. Thank you for joining me on Blender TC. Please subscribe to my channel and don't forget, hit that bell.